What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, January 16th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. First show of the week for me. Been working on some other stuff, haven't had a chance to do it. But looking forward to talking about it today. 5-game slate. Pretty interesting. We did get Houston news right before the show started. I reran for that as well as I could, but haven't obviously had a lot of time to actually dig into what I think Houston's going to do. Kind of just threw some stuff together off the top of my head. And ownership is generally going to be kind of weird in a situation like this, too, just because everything was on such short notice. But going to talk through the Houston game, obviously, when we get there, and maybe some things will stand out. But as far as other things, reasons I didn't do the show so far this week, did release a new video at Endgame Syndicate with Utica and Nerdy Tenor, basically just a halfway point of the NBA season, talking about trends with teams that we've noticed, how maybe you can apply them to DFS. So that video is up at Endgame. And then also I tweeted about it earlier and saw Ozzy ask about it already in chat. I did go ahead and make my NBA projections publicly available. I hadn't done it yet this year just because I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was doing too much NFL and NBA wise. But with NFL wrapping up, I did do that. So those are available. Link is in the description below. 7-day free trial through Dub Club. Ozzy asked if I can show a preview. Yeah, it's just a spreadsheet that has my projections. I can throw it up on the screen. But the thing that I think is difficult about NBA, and one of the reasons that I was kind of hesitant to do anything, is that with all of the late news and all of that, it can be difficult to get anything done. To update stuff around lock. So I wanted to make sure that I had something that was relatively simple. Like in baseball, my projections and everything had an optimal percentage and top stack percentage and all of that. And it's just time consuming. So I couldn't do anything like that for NBA, but went ahead and threw this together. So this is just a spreadsheet. I'll send out the link every morning, and then it just updates in real time at the same time that I'm updating my projections. So has DraftKings, has FanDuel, has my minutes projections, my player projections. And then since I'm not going to have time to do actual, sim optimals or anything like that, as news breaks, I did just throw in a couple columns that give a rough estimate of how often players will hit different target scores. So you can use those kind of depending on what size tournament you're playing. The larger the tournament, the more you need higher scores, obviously. So I put those in there. Those will automatically calculate. So they aren't adding any more time to me. You don't have to wait on anything to update there. So pretty basic stuff, but I think it'll be good for anybody who, isn't trying to pay tons of money for projection plus optimizer plus sim packages or whatever sites are offering now. Should give you a quality set of projections, quality set of data that you can use for relatively little, $30 a month or $10 a week. But again, 7-day free trial using the link in the description below. So if you're trying to save some money on projections, that is available now. You can also see when it last updated. So if you're not sure, if Houston news updated or whatever, you can see the timestamp up there. That changes whenever I change anything in my main projection sheet. So that's what that is. So check that out. Link is in the description below. Now getting back to today's slate. Again, only 5 games, but it is a pretty interesting one. We have the Cleveland-Oklahoma City game as well. Isaiah Hartenstein out, which is giving us our highest owned guy on the slate most likely. But here, starting with Phoenix taking on Washington, we do have injury news here as well. Bradley Beal is out for the Suns. Josh Okogie is no longer on the team. Nick Richards is not available yet. So they are in basically the same situation that they have been, except for Bradley Beal being out. And I think Bradley Beal being out is a really big deal, because even though he's been coming off the bench lately, he has still been playing north of 30 minutes. He's been closing games. And so his absence has a couple of impacts. For one, it just takes away one of the guys that they would go to when they go small. And so you could see potentially a little bit more combined playing time for Mason Plumlee and Iguodaro. But also it opens up another spot in the closing lineup. So typically for the Suns, what you have as far as closers go is Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, usually sometimes one of the two centers. But you basically have 3 guys locked in. And then you have 2 spots open for a center slash Grayson Allen, Ryan Dunn, Royce O'Neal. Now you have Tyus Jones. Now you have 3 spots open. And I think that Beal's absence increases the minutes upside for guys like Grayson Allen, Ryan Dunn, and Royce O'Neal. Like from a median standpoint, I do think they project, a minute or so better than they would if Beal were in. We have seen Grayson Allen typically playing more than Royce O'Neal lately. That can flip at any time. Ryan Dunn's minutes are going to vary as well. He is somebody that I think is probably more likely to be in the game if the Suns are playing from ahead at the end, as they're likely to be, compared to if they're playing from behind. But again, I think all of those guys are going to be really volatile. The spot that I'm actually really interested in here, though, and you see it showing up actually as my highest owned guy right now from Phoenix, if the slate were starting right now, is Tyus Jones, because his salary dropped to $4,300. The reason the salary has dropped is that we saw a change in the rotation with Beal moving to the bench, with Dunn moving into the starting lineup, and Tyus Jones' playing time has really plummeted as a result. But I think he's going to get his minutes back here with Beal out, because it makes it a little bit less likely that you have Devin Booker closing as the point guard. And we've seen plenty of games this year where Beal has been out. Tyus Jones has yet to play less than 31 minutes in a game where Beal was out and Booker and Durant were in. Now, that's not to say that he's guaranteed to play 31 plus minutes here. I projected him for about 29 and a half. Obviously, there is still blowout risk. There is still the chance that they do close with Booker, Durant, O'Neal, Allen, Plumlee, or something like that. But it's a little bit less likely with Beal out, and Jones is pretty likely, is more likely to be closing with him out. So I do like this spot for Tyus Jones. Good matchup against Washington. The salary's cheap enough where, you also have outs where even if I'm wrong and he still only plays 24, 25 minutes, at 4,300, he can still put up a useful score against Washington. But, again, I think if he plays 28 to 30 minutes, he looks like a really good value here that isn't getting as much ownership as I kind of thought that he would at this salary. Kevin Durant's getting a bunch of ownership, deservedly so. I'm not quite to the field, but still getting to 40% of him. Homecoming game, if you're into narratives, which, obviously I'm not. I can find plenty of reasons to play Kevin Durant against the Wizards without knowing where he is from. But if you're into that kind of stuff, it is a homecoming game for him as well. Devin Booker, very good spot for him, 9,100. Getting about half the ownership of Durant, which I do think is interesting just when you think about it from an upside standpoint. Obviously, Devin Booker can be the one that just goes off and buries Washington in place of Durant. But also, Devin Booker's a guard. Generally, you're just going to have more high upside guard plays, a higher opportunity cost at the position. So you can see that I think even at the lower ownership, it does still make sense to have more Durant than Booker just because of the positions that they are eligible at. But they both look like very good, very high upside plays here. Grayson Allen getting 28% ownership at 4,200. I think this is directly related to Tyus Jones. I have, a 25.5-minute projection on Grayson Allen. I don't think that's crazy low or anything. But I have seen him projected for an extra minute or two in a lot of places, which I do think is very reasonable. If somebody tells you that they're only projecting Tyus Jones for 27, 28 minutes, and they're going to, 27, 28 on Allen, or maybe they're knocking an extra minute or two off of either Dunn or O'Neal and giving them to Allen, all of that's reasonable. But I think that on a game-to-game basis, you just have a lot of volatility in the playing time for Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, and Ryan Dunn. And so I think projecting for me 25 to 26 Allen made a lot of sense. It looks good in the context of how I projected everything else. There's still going to be plenty of games that he does play, upper 20s and he closes. So I think he's a perfectly good value. He's 4,200. He's cheap. He's in a good spot. Shooting guard, small forward, all of that is useful, but he's the same price essentially as Tyus Jones, and he's getting 2x the ownership when I have Tyus Jones projected for more fantasy points, more minutes. That's just a spot where I'm going to play a lot of Tyus Jones. If you disagree with me and you don't think Tyus Jones is getting a minute bump with Bradley Beal out, and you think those minutes are just going to be heavily distributed to the wings, then by all means, play a lot of Grayson Allen. He's a really good play if you think that. I think that Beal being out makes it more likely that you get the Grayson Allen minute ceiling game, but I don't necessarily think it changes his actual projection all that much. He projects higher for sure with Beal out than in, but I think Tyus Jones is actually the biggest beneficiary, and the field doesn't agree. So I'm just going to end up pushing spots like that aggressively. If I'm right, great. If I'm wrong, on to tomorrow kind of thing. But that's how I see this one. So it's not a knock on Grayson Allen so much as there are a lot of good popular plays. And then this is a spot where I can just save some ownership, play a little bit more Tyus Jones. Jason said, I feel like Jones should be like 50% owned. Seems like the best play on the slate. Yeah, I don't know about best because you do have Jalen Williams at minimum salary. But to me, he's up there, as you can see on the screen. If ownership were to flip, like 35% starts coming into Tyus and 15% comes to Grayson, I assume that I start to lose some Tyus and get more Grayson. But right now, I think that Tyus is, in my opinion, the biggest beneficiary with Bradley Beal out, just because of what we've seen from a playing time standpoint in these situations before. There is, the case too, where maybe Tyus Jones' minutes have dropped off lately because, basketball reasons, the coaching staff is trying to play him less, whatever. That is possible, but the fact that it coincided directly with the change in the rotation to Bradley Beal going to the bench makes me think that it's likely we just see Tyus Jones go back to the role he had earlier in the year when Beal was out, or when even Beal was playing with the starters. You were seeing not as many minutes for Jones, but so I think you're just going to go back to that, but we'll see. Ryan Dunn, 6% owned, 4K. I got to 10%. I think he projects for similar playing time to Allen. Like I said, I do think it's relatively likely too that if Phoenix is playing from ahead, Ryan Dunn finds his way into the closing lineup because they can have him out there for defensive reasons. But he's not as good a point per minute guy. He doesn't give you the same sort of point per minute volatility that somebody like Grayson Allen does. Royce O'Neal not getting much ownership at 7%. I do think these guys are kind of interchangeable just because there is going to be a hot hand effect. If Grayson Allen's not knocking down shots and Ryan Dunn is, or Royce O'Neal is, those guys can jump ahead of Grayson Allen. And so there is, some negative correlation there as far as who, probably only two of these guys closing most likely. But I think Allen does project the best of the group, but they are pretty similar. So I think mixing in some Dunn and O'Neal at low ownership makes sense too. Mason Plumlee, playing time generally going to be low to mid 20s here. It is a really good matchup for him, and he is cheap, but center position that has a lot of opportunity cost. The clear top point per dollar value on the slate is at center in Jalen Williams on Oklahoma City. You have Sabonis on the slate. You have Şengün without Fred VanVleet. You have DeAndre Ayton, who I'll have plenty to say about. You have Zubats. You have Jared Allen against a centerless, basically, Oklahoma City front court. So, this is a position, or it's a position where, the opportunity cost is really high, and that does keep interest in Mason Plumlee down a bit. On the Washington side, they are 11.5 point dogs here. They are at home at least, and Phoenix, certainly isn't the best team in the world. So decent chance that they're able to at least keep this one somewhat competitive for most of the game, but Washington is pretty bad. I do think it creates an interesting spot in tournaments, though, to get to the quote-unquote good players on Washington. This is actually something that Yuta and Nerdy and I talked about in the endgame video that I was referring to yesterday. Washington being a team that is just very frequently going to be in these games where they're 10 to 15 point underdogs. And a lot of times, obviously, that leads to them, their main guys, losing minutes because of garbage time. But that ends up being reflected in their salaries and in their ownership because it lowers their median projection. It lowers their salary. It doesn't actually lower their ceilings, though. We just saw Kyle Kuzma play 35 and a half minutes in Washington's last game. 2 games ago, he played 30 minutes in a massive blowout loss against Oklahoma City. He's a full go at this point from a health standpoint. If this game is competitive, you're likely getting mid-30s in minutes from Kyle Kuzma. And then you couple that with the fact that if this game's competitive, there's not that many guys on Washington that can score enough to make it competitive. So it's pretty much Kyle Kuzma or Jordan Poole most likely doing all of the heavy lifting for this offense if Washington hangs in the game, assuming they hang in the game and like both teams are scoring, not they hang in the game because Phoenix shoots like 12% from three or something. If that happens, it's just an ugly game all around. But Jordan Poole at 4% owned, Kyle Kuzma at 7% owned, really, really nice tournament upside here on a 5-game slate to be able to get that type of scoring upside. And then you also get some positive correlation with the guys that you're already playing. If Jordan Poole goes off, it increases the likelihood that Kevin Durant plays 37 minutes. If Kuzma goes off, it increases the likelihood that Durant and Booker play 37 minutes. So you're already playing those guys. You get some positive correlation running it back with one of the only guys that can score on the Washington side. So I'm not saying you need to do that in every lineup or anything like that, but I do think it's very appealing getting to the scorers on Washington in your tournament lineups, as long as the ownership remains low. Alex Sarr, same kind of thing, does have power forward eligibility as well, which is really nice on DraftKings. But what you're essentially getting at the center position from Washington this season is 48 minutes combined from Sarr and Joval. They really haven't played small lineups, even when they've been shorthanded. And I don't expect that to change tonight. Obviously, I guess it could at some point. Washington certainly isn't playing for anything. But what ends up happening with the centers here is their average minutes, around 26 and a half for Alex Sarr, like 18 to 19 for Joval. But if this game's competitive, Alex Sarr is probably playing 28 to 30. If you were to get in foul trouble, Joval's playing more. So there is that volatility in these guys as well. Sarr looks interesting to me at pretty low ownership at 5,600. We've seen Koulibaly take on a little bit bigger role at times this year. That's not as true when Kuzma and Poole are both healthy. But if this game's competitive, you're probably getting mid-30s in minutes from Koulibaly at 5,500. Not the best point per minute guy, but I think you can mix him in a little bit. I mentioned Joval's upside, obviously a great point per minute guy, but he is up to 5,100. Carrington's been starting, not a great point per minute guy. So getting a little bit of him, but really Kuzma, Poole, and to a little bit lesser extent Sarr, I think are all really, really interesting tournament plays here. Moving on to Indiana and Detroit, one of the teams where we do still have a huge Q tag on Tyrese Halliburton. Aaron Nesmith also questionable. I assume that if Nesmith is back, he's coming off the bench and playing a limited role right now. If we get him in the starting lineup, obviously that assumption changes. We do not have Benedict Mathurin. He is suspended one game for bumping a ref in their last game. So if Halliburton is in, I assume we're getting the same starting lineup as last game, except with Halliburton in place of Mathurin. So it would be Halliburton, Nembhard, Shepard, Siakam, and Turner. And I projected it to be pretty similar rotationally to the last game. If Halliburton is also out, I don't know what we'll get as a starting lineup. Like maybe they give Furphy a spot start. Maybe they move Jarris Walker into the starting lineup. Maybe you actually get a McConnell start. I don't really know. There's a lot of ways that they could go with that. But for now, I have Halliburton projected in. I'm not prioritizing anything from Indiana, but I do think that the typical pieces from their starting lineup look fine. Basically 2x the field on Miles Turner. He should give you around 30 minutes or so here. 6K price tag is pretty reasonable given just his volatility, his point per minute upside. Pascal Siakam's playing time has been down for a while now. 7,200, still a good player, and he's in a decent spot here against Detroit. The issue is just, how many minutes is he going to play? I do think if you get Halliburton out along with Mathurin out, you probably do get more playing time for Siakam because at that point you have minutes opening up just because they're missing two of their main players. But you also have the need for more playmaking, more scoring, the things that Siakam does well. So I do think that you would see a nice bump for Siakam if Halliburton ends up missing along with Mathurin. But assuming Halliburton's in, I assume you're just getting around 32 minutes or so again for Siakam because you do still have Obi Toppin to play minutes. Thomas Bryant has firmly been in this rotation lately as the backup center behind Turner, which the trickle-down effect of that is Obi Toppin is playing most of his minutes as the backup four, which just makes it more difficult for Siakam to have those big playing time games. Tyrese Halliburton only getting 5% ownership at 8,400. On a 5-game slate, anytime Halliburton is, 5% owned or so, I'm going to be fine taking shots on him. I'm not getting to tons of him, but clearly has a high ceiling at that salary. This game is in Detroit, which isn't ideal because Halliburton has actually been worse on the road this year for whatever reason. There have been some rumors that it has to do with back injury that he's been nursing. But one way or the other, when you're talking about large field tournaments, you're not really trying to get that granular. You're not trying to get all the way down to, what do I think Halliburton is actually going to do? It's more so he's 5% owned. What can he do? And obviously he can go drop 60, 70 fantasy points. So my night's not revolving around him, but if the ownership is going to be that low, I am interested as a contrarian play in lineups where I'm taking on more ownership elsewhere. Beyond that, just getting to a little bit of McConnell, Jarris Walker, Nembhard. Nembhard certainly looks better if Halliburton is out. McConnell would look better if Halliburton is out. Jarris Walker also would look better at 3,200. I think you would actually see him play a relatively big role for a $3,200 player if they're also missing Halliburton. On the Detroit side, no new injury news here. Jaden Ivey is still out. A bunch of other guys that I've never heard of are also out. The big thing that we've talked about a lot is Jaden Ivey being out is huge for Cade Cunningham. It's an unusual situation in that he gets a bump in his usage rate. he gets a bump in his assist percentage, and he really doesn't lose much in the way of efficiency. Whenever you get a main piece out of the lineup like Jaden Ivey, you always have to be careful kind of balancing all of these factors. Like you'll get, myself included, because you're just trying to get as much information out in a short period of time as you can, especially if you're on a show with a co-host and you only get to talk for half the time. I'm able to say a little bit more since I don't have to listen to anybody else. But what ends up happening is people kind of simplify it and they say, oh, Jaden Ivey's out. Cade Cunningham usage is up, and that makes him a better play. And in general, whenever you're talking about anybody in that context, it is true, because if the usage goes up, the opportunities go up, the ceiling goes up, all of that. But what happens for most players is usage goes up, so their shot volume is going up, but in a lot of cases, their assist percentage is coming down. And if they're a player that typically gets a relatively high percentage of their fantasy production from assists, it's not like you're just getting pure profit in terms of that shot volume increasing if the assists are coming down. But what also ends up happening is as shot volume is going up, they're taking more bad shots. Their efficiency is going to go down, or they don't have that secondary scorer or primary scorer to take defensive attention off of them. So it also leads to worse shots and their efficiency going down. In Cunningham's case, none of that has really happened. The usage rate goes up, so he's getting more shot volume, but the assist percentage is going up as well, because basically he just has the ball in his hands constantly now, because nobody else in this offense is going to handle the ball. Tim Hardaway's not, Beasley's not going to do a lot of it. Harris isn't, Duran certainly isn't, Sar Thompson's not. So you just have Cade Cunningham making the decision on like every possession of whether he shoots or he passes it to somebody else. But also he's been able to maintain his efficiency for the most part. His efficiency with Jaden Ivey on the floor versus off is only like 1 point higher. So he's producing at a lot higher rate. And then on top of all of that, he plays more minutes without Jaden Ivey, assuming he can avoid foul trouble, which has been a little bit of an issue for him lately. But all of that said, it makes Cade Cunningham look great. This $10,300 salary is warranted. You also have plenty of value on this slate. You have opportunity cost at the guard position, as usual, but it's not as high as it would be on a lot of other slates since there are only 5 games. You also don't have to worry about getting to Jokic, getting to Giannis, getting to those true pay-up options today like you do on some other slates either. So Cunningham looks great. He's one of the highest projected guys on the slate. I think I have him second to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I have him second to SGA, and then a pretty big gap between him and anybody else. You have like a Durant, Sabonis, Booker, Harden second tier, I think. But to me, tier 1 is pretty much just SGA and Cade Cunningham. So I really like Cunningham a lot. Asar Thompson, 4,500, did play more minutes in his most recent start. Played, I believe, 25 minutes. I'm pulling that one up now to double check. But, doesn't have the highest minutes ceiling, doesn't have a ton of volatility in his playing time, but he played 25.7 minutes last game. I have him in for 23 and a half here. So, I always like to see that when I'm getting to somebody that does kind of have somewhat capped minutes like Thompson. If I had him projected for 25 and a half minutes and I'm getting 19%, I wouldn't feel that great about it because I'm kind of projecting his ceiling. But, a 23 and a half minute projection, I am accounting for the fact that, he's kind of capped at 25, 26 minutes. The problem you can run into is when you sim everything, the sim doesn't, it assumes that he has the same kind of minutes range that most players would. And so it's going to say, if you tell he's playing 25 and a half minutes, it's going to say, oh, well, here he plays 29, here he plays 30, when really that's not happening for him. There's games where he plays 20, but there's no real games that he plays 30. So I'm happy that, at 23 and a half minutes, I am still getting to him at 4,500. I think he looks like a fine value at forward. Jalen Duren's always somebody that I like playing at low ownership in tournaments. You just have so much minutes volatility on him because he's in foul trouble so often. But if he can avoid it, he can play, 28 to 30 minutes. He's a good point per minute guy. Again, like I was saying with somebody like Halliburton, with Poole, with Kuzma, my night's not revolving around him. I don't think I need to go into this slate saying like Jalen Duren's the best play on the slate. I'm going to play him everywhere. You don't need to take on that kind of risk, but it is a very nice spot to differentiate in lineups. On a slate like this, that's only 5 games, that has a lot of pretty clear-cut plays, you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you just start like kind of blindly not playing the most popular plays in a lot of cases, because they're just really good plays and you don't have a ton of alternatives since there's only 10 teams to find plays from. But it's really nice when the slate does give you good point per minute volatile guys at low ownership that you can throw into those lineups, and makes it so you don't have to go to like really ugly plays to get different. So I like that with Duran. Tobias Harris's playing time is up with Jaden Ivey out. He's not a good point per minute guy. Salaries come up a little bit. Certainly not any level of priority, but again, somebody you can use to differentiate. Same goes for Tim Hardaway Jr. at 4,100. Should play 30 low 30s in minutes, but he is a horrible fantasy producer, so that offsets it. Catching up on chat a little bit, Nicky Tarantino said I wanted to play Whitmore, but not Eason. Will probably play. I personally am not projecting Tari Eason to play until I see proof that the guy is alive. He's been supposedly almost back from injury, or from injury management, they're calling it, for like a month. So I don't know. Maybe he does come back tonight and play. Obviously, that does have an impact on what Houston does, and I'll talk about that more later. But I'm not projecting him in until I get it confirmed he's playing, or at least see that he's like living. As far as the rest of Houston, I'll talk about that when we get there. Jake said can't wait for the Ayton monologue. Yeah, that's an interesting spot. Slate seems pretty cut and dry. Yeah, kind of. That's sort of what I was getting to before, where like I think it's a difficult slate to like find popular plays and say like, oh, this guy sucks, I'm not playing him. Like I think that's pretty tough. Or this guy priced right around him is a really obvious pivot. You kind of got that with like Tyus Jones, Grayson Allen, but I don't think Grayson Allen's a bad player or anything. Can I beat Josh in a fist fight? I don't think there's anything Josh can beat yet. So yeah, I mean he's got the size advantage, but I think he's a little less masculine and all of that. So I like my chances there. Yeah, Van Vliet's out. That one was surprising. Do I think Kobe Mayo starts next year? No, probably not. At least initially. Maybe platoons. But it also depends what trades they end up making. Like if they end up trading Mountcastle, you could end up seeing Mayo start. Moving on to Cleveland and Oklahoma City in what should absolutely be the best basketball game tonight. Oklahoma City, obviously great defensive team. They are missing Hartenstein, in addition to, of course, missing Chet Holmgren. They do have Alex Caruso back. So you have, again, just no shortage of good on-ball wing defenders, all of that, that can make life difficult for Cleveland. The positive for Cleveland is that they don't play many competitive games, and this game is about as likely as it gets to be competitive. So you can add an extra couple of minutes onto guys like all of the starters. You can see on the screen, I have 30 and a half minutes projected to Jared Allen. I have 33 apiece going to Mobley, Mitchell, Garland. That's about as high as you'll ever see me project those guys. Like games still can blow out, so I'm not going the full like 34 or 35. Foul trouble happens. We've seen plenty of Cleveland games this year that are competitive, and Mitchell still plays like 32 minutes. So 33, I think, is a very reasonable projection here. Getting to Evan Mobley, he's 16% owned, 8,100 power forward, and center eligible. I'm getting to 20%. I think he looks pretty good here. You do have an Oklahoma City team that will give up rebounds even when Hartenstein is in. And then now you just have a small front court. I'm assuming that Jalen Williams, the other one, gets to start. And then Jalen Williams, the one that normally starts, J-Dub, gets the backup center minutes. That's my guess here. I've seen Brandon Carlson projected for a handful of minutes. I don't think that would be bad for Evan Mobley if that's the backup center. I'm assuming that OKC just leans on how many, their abundance of wings, and takes advantage of the fact that Cleveland does have a small backup center. They can just go to their small backup center and then run more minutes for like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, however many minutes Alex Caruso can physically play, Kenrich Williams. I expect that to be the OKC rotation, but it does set up as a pretty nice spot for Mobley. And then also for Jared Allen. We saw him put up a really big game against OKC in that last game, and I don't think it was by accident. Oklahoma City, very, very good at everything defensively. They do a very good job of defending the roll man in the pick and roll. But what they don't do a good job of is limiting putbacks, and Jared Allen can do damage there. So I do think that is interesting, in addition to the fact that he is likely to play a little bit more. Center, again, is deep, 10% owned. I'm getting 7 to 8%. 6,500. I do like the upside he offers. And then you get to Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Throw them in that same bucket with like Tyrese Halliburton. They're pretty similarly priced, both a little bit less expensive. But clearly one of these guys can just go off. They're likely to play more minutes than usual, but they do also just have the worst matchup you can possibly have going up against this Oklahoma City team. On the OKC side, saw somebody just ask about Jalen. I wouldn't say he's a lock because he's going to be 70% owned. I'm getting to 75%. He scares me because he's center only, so the opportunity cost is high. He's going up against this Cleveland team. Like, he has to deal with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. But I would expect him to be out there a lot. We don't have a lot of data either on what to expect from him as a starter. He only started one game last year. He played 28 minutes. But then if you go back to the previous season when he was getting a lot of starts, that was when Oklahoma City was doing a lot of weird shit with their rotation. He would start but only play like 18 minutes. Dagnall would change the starting lineup at halftime. So you can't really take a whole lot away from what we've seen from him in past games. But Jared Allen's presence makes me think they'll probably want his size out there. The fact they don't have any other bigs that they can really use. I went 25 and a half minutes. So that's the other thing here. Kind of like I was saying with Asar Thompson, it wouldn't shock me if Jalen Williams played 28, 30 minutes. So it's not like I think I projected his ceiling here going to 25 and a half. But assuming he starts, I think I'm pretty comfortable with this projection. He's a 1.1 fantasy point per minute guy for the season. That can obviously come down a bit in this matchup with Cleveland, but this game also doesn't have a low total. Like OKC plays at a fast pace. There's going to be plenty of possessions in this game, plenty of just rebound opportunities, and he's only 3,300. So, it is scary, but I think pretty clearly the best point per dollar projection. I'm right around the field here at 70% owned. The biggest or probably the scariest thing here is it does go back to the opportunity cost at the position. Like you can see I have him projected for 27 DraftKings points. Obviously, if you project anybody at 3,300 for 27 DraftKings points, they're going to show up in lineups a lot. But let's say he actually gets like 28 DraftKings points. You are in a good position. But if he gets 28 DraftKings points and then Sabonis goes for 65 and Şengün goes for 55, you're in a lot of trouble because you can't have all three of them together because of positions. So in that situation, like you need to have guards that go absolutely nuts as well to make up for it. So you can kind of get boxed out when you play value centers. It's like a catch-22 because value centers are a little bit safer in the context of like they rebound. They have more rebound opportunities. That's a little bit more stable stat than like relying on shooting luck and all of that. So it makes them look a little bit better, but then it's a little bit easier to just get boxed out by two centers putting up massive games that you can't have together. So that's probably why I only have 75%. Like if you were a forward or a guard and projected like this, he'd probably be in every single lineup. But clearly looks really good. Shea looks very good at 10.5. Like I said, I have him as the highest projected guy on the slate. He's getting 33% ownership. I'm getting the 43%. You can project him for more minutes, just like you could the Cleveland guys. And I think that it is really important to mention with him because he does play big minutes in competitive games. I went back and looked at the last few games that Oklahoma City has actually played against good teams. The last game against Cleveland, they played Boston this month. They played the Knicks this month. You got 36.7, 38.2, and 38.3 minutes in those games from Shea. Now, obviously, I'm not saying it's a lock. This game goes all the way down to the wire, but I projected him for 36 minutes here, and that is a couple minutes at least higher than you pretty much ever get to project Shea. So makes him look very good. The other Jalen Williams, 8K, 33% owned. I expect him to be getting backup center minutes, or at least whoever you want to call the center between like him and Kenrich. I expect him to be out there. I expect there to be plenty of rebound chances for him. I think he'll benefit a little bit in that regard from Hartenstein not playing. So I like getting to him as well. He obviously has forward eligibility. Lou Dort at 4K. I think he's going a little underprojected from a minute standpoint. He's another one where he does always have to contend with foul risk because a lot of times he's going to be defending the highest usage guys on the opposing team. So he can get in foul trouble. But if this game's competitive and he avoids foul trouble, he has 38-minute upside. Not saying that I'm projecting him anywhere close to that. I only projected 31, and I'm still getting over the field. But we saw him play like 38 and a half minutes against, I think it was Boston, or maybe it was the last Cleveland game. I don't remember. One of those competitive games, he played like 39 minutes. He also played 34 and 32 and a half. Like he has huge minute upside here if he's able to stay on the floor. Clearly not a great point per minute guy, but he's 4K on a 5-game slate at modest ownership. Getting to some Isaiah Joe, Kenrich Williams, a little bit of Cason Wallace here. These cheaper pieces on Oklahoma City. I do think that like Isaiah Joe, Kenrich Williams at dirt cheap price tags are somewhat interesting just because I expect Oklahoma City to play small. When you lately what they've been doing rotationally is Hartenstein is starting at center and Jalen Williams, Jalen with a Y, is getting most of those backup center minutes. Now I'm expecting him to start and the other Jalen to get pretty much all of the minutes. Again, I don't think they go to Carlson much, if at all. So that opens up more of these wing minutes for Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, Isaiah Joe, Alex Caruso, I assume, is only playing like 19 or 20. Casey Wallace can play a little bit more too. So, Aaron Wiggins, I think, has that same sort of volatility in his playing time where he could play more minutes, especially if he's playing well. But he's 4,100. So, you are talking about him being a bit more expensive than guys like Isaiah Joe, Kenrich Williams, that can step into more playing time and don't need to do quite as much to outperform their salary. Casey Wallace getting 10% ownership, I think, is fine if you get there as well. And I'm not talking anybody off of Wiggins. Like if that's your guy and you think he's just really likely to be the bench guy that plays a lot of minutes, then fine. But I projected him pretty similarly to Isaiah Joe, who is just less expensive. So that's the one that I'm getting. Same for Kenrich. But it's a really interesting team, really interesting game, I think. Tizzle said Hallie is playing. That's good. I really did not want to deal with Indiana on this slate. What about Kenrich? Yeah, I think he plays more. I didn't go too crazy there. I think I went 18 and a half minutes. Maybe he gets to 20. But I'm getting right around the field even at 18 and a half. So I kind of treated the bench guys on OKC similarly to the ones on Phoenix, where I think they have a really wide range of outcomes from a playing time standpoint. So I didn't want to get too aggressive in picking which one it is, because I think a lot of it is going to be determined by how the game is going and who is playing well. And I obviously have no idea whose shot is going to be falling during this game. If Isaiah Joe starts making every three that he takes, he's probably getting as many minutes as he can possibly get. If Aaron Wiggins is playing really well, same thing. Same for Kenrich. So I kind of tried to just project them all in a way where I'm not choosing a stand on them. I'm not saying I think it's Wiggins. I'm saying, okay, I think Wiggins is playing anywhere from 18 to 25 minutes. I think Joe is playing anywhere from 18 to 25 minutes. I think Kenrich is playing anywhere from 16 to 22 minutes, something like that. And I'll let ownership take care of it. I'll let, Sims handle the volatility and all of that. So that was my approach, both with the Phoenix bench guys / Ryan Dunn and the Oklahoma City guys. The difference, Phoenix, I did kind of with Tyus Jones say, no, I think he is playing more. But with the other guys, I think it's more just kind of not that it's not with Tyus, but it's more, I think, who's playing well because they all just have very similar roles. So that was my approach with their bench. Moving on to the Clippers and the Blazers in a game that I'm sure will end up being a massive blowout in one direction because the Clippers are playing unbelievably 59-point win last night or something against Brooklyn. I assume they'll lose by 40 today because that's how things work. But this game does only have a 7-point spread. I projected the Clippers pretty flat for the most part here, outside of their main pieces. There is, obviously blowout risk in this game, jokes aside. But you don't have Kawhi. Chris Dunn, I think it was questionable. They added somebody to their injury report right before the show, and I'm blanking on who it is. I'm double checking now. It was Terrence Mann is questionable. He only played 8 minutes yesterday. I projected him for 16 today. I don't think he matters a ton. If he is out, then maybe you get more minutes for probably Amir Coffey. Chris Dunn and Derek Jones's projections would go up a little bit if Mann is out. I don't know what they're doing with Kevin Porter Jr. They said before yesterday's game that he wouldn't be in the rotation. They stuck to that. He did not play garbage time of the 60-point win. So I don't know what they're doing. I haven't seen anything on if he is in the rotation today. I projected him for 16, 17 minutes, something like that. So basically, for now, my approach was that, Zubats, Harden, Powell are going to, get their normal minutes. I went 33 to 34 on them. If this game actually is competitive, that's probably 35 to 37. But from a median standpoint, in that 33, 34 minute range, Zubats, I'm getting half the field. I'm still getting 20%. I think he looks good. He always does. Plays big minutes. He's 7,100, good point per minute guy. Not the most imposing Portland front court here, though you do maybe have Robert Williams playing along with Ayton now. But Zubats looks good. I think it's just the amount of ownership coming into him when you already have so much coming in at center to Williams. And just a lot of good popular plays anyway. Guys that are 1 at center and 2 in that 7K range, you actually can find plenty of pivots that have a similar range of outcomes. And so normally it's kind of just the approach that I'm going to end up taking. It's not a knock on Zubats or anything like that. I think he is a good play for sure. But it's just almost always going to be easier to say, okay, this center projects a little bit worse, or this 7K guy, regardless of position, projects a little bit worse, but his ceiling is just as high. It's easy to find guys like that. It's hard to say, oh, this other $3,300 guy projects similarly to Jalen Williams. There's no 3K guy on this slate that is one, low owned, and two, projects anywhere close to that Jalen Williams. So the gap is just bigger. It's harder to find those pivots. And that's kind of what's happening here with Zubats. I am still getting to him though. Chris Dunn, I'm kind of 2x the field at 3,400, just hoping variance works out. I projected him for 25 minutes. We saw his playing time drop with Kawhi back, but Kawhi's out. Now Man might not play. I don't know what they're doing with Porter. So just expecting, mid-20s from Dunn. If Man is out, I'll probably add a minute or so on there. But the lack of ownership makes him look interesting. I'm fine getting to James Harden at 9,100 in that same bucket as like Devin Booker. Kevin Porter Jr., I don't know. I don't know what to do with him. I'm probably going to walk his playing time back a little bit because I have no confidence in it. But it's also not crazy to think that he just plays his normal backup minutes today. And if he's not going to be owned at all, like at 3,700 in a game with a relatively high spread, it's kind of interesting in your large field tournaments. But again, I don't want a big part of my night revolving around a guy that, could just be behind Miller in the rotation now for all that I know. So I'll probably end up lowering that a little bit since I am actually getting to him. Norm Powell getting 26% ownership. This is another one kind of like Zubats, except I'm not getting to quite as much. 7,300 shooting guard, small forward. Perfectly fine spot. Probably plays a lot of minutes, assuming if the game's competitive. But it's just not that difficult to find lower owned guys in this price range compared to at the top end and at the bottom. Like there's not a lot of guys that give you the same range of outcomes as Shea or as Cade Cunningham does. And the ones that do are still getting some ownership, Durant, Booker, Harden, all these guys. And then again, the value pieces, there's not that many viable value options on a five game slate that are low owned. So it just goes back to anybody in the mid range is getting a lot of ownership. I'm probably just still playing them, but not at the same rate as the field, because that's going to be the spot where I'm saying, I'll play Halliburton here, or I'll play Jalen Duren here. I'll play Miles Turner here. I'll play Kyle Kuzma at 1/3 the ownership of Powell, for example, as a pivot forward. So I'm perfectly fine with that approach. Jordan Poole at guard, same kind of thing. So I'm happy with that approach. Obviously, it doesn't always work, but that's like in my head how I would want to approach the slate. So I see here. So I'm glad that it's working out that way. Derek Jones Jr., 3,600, can certainly mix him in some. You can mix in some coffee at 3,300. I don't have too much of either right now, but maybe that comes up when I figure out how to get a little bit less of KPJ. But yeah, I think the Clippers are kind of, you're confident in Zubats, Harden, and Powell in their playing time. And then everybody else is kind of just like, they probably play anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. And hopefully whichever ones you play are the ones that get those minutes. The nice thing is that it probably will be, at least in some part, determined by how they're playing. Just like I was saying with the Phoenix guys and the OKC guys, it is nice being able to get to inexpensive players where there are minutes available if they're playing well, as opposed to inexpensive players where no matter how well they play, there's some superstar established ahead of them, and they're going right back to the bench as soon as that guy is ready to come back in the game. So you do get plenty of minutes available. Like when you think about the closing lineup for the Clippers in a competitive game, it's Ivica Zubats, James Harden, Norman Powell, and whatever two guys are playing well out of everybody else. So it does make the Clippers a pretty nice team as far as volatility goes and upside goes in tournaments. On the Portland side, Robert Williams was doubtful earlier in the day. He is now questionable. This does matter. Not that I think he's somebody that you're really playing in tournaments, but it has an impact on the DeAndre Ayton, who you're never going to feel good about playing, but he is $6,100, played 24 minutes last game. Klingon played all of the backup minutes, but Klingon's out tonight. And so the reason that I think Ayton is interesting to talk about, if Robert Williams is in, I expect that you're just getting, the normal like 30 minutes or so from Ayton, and then you're getting like 16, 17, whatever from Robert Williams behind him. Maybe Reef plays a minute or two. Maybe Jabari Walker comes in. But I think you're just getting like normal playing time from DeAndre Ayton, which he's 7% owned. I'm getting 9%. He's in that same bucket with like Miles Turner, where he still has a ceiling, but there's nothing that makes him look special here. Where I think he's interesting, though, is basically my favorite spot to target in DFS. I love when it comes up. It came up yesterday with Mark Williams. I don't think the industry as a whole reacts very well to backup centers being out, because you can always just grab the next guy and say, oh, well, now he's the backup center. But what teams normally do is give a couple of extra minutes to their starter. Last night, for example, when you didn't have Nick Richards and you didn't have Diabate for the Hornets, I thought it was a mistake to just project Mark Williams the same and then give a bunch of minutes to Taj Gibson. Gibson was obviously going to be the backup center, but I thought it was likely Mark Williams would play a couple minutes more. I was surprised, or didn't think that he should only be 8% owned. If Robert Williams is out tonight, I do think it's the same thing with DeAndre Ayton. Again, you have the downsides of the team probably or might just hate DeAndre Ayton, but he's had 6 games so far this season where neither one of Clingan or Robert Williams were active. In 5 of those 6 games, he's played at least 31 or 32 minutes. The only game where he didn't, he played 17 minutes in a 40-point loss to Utah. Clearly didn't get garbage time in that one. But you've seen him play significantly more minutes in these games where he doesn't have either of his backup centers. And so I would end up projecting him for like 32 minutes instead of 30. I don't think the field would, because I know early in the day Williams was projected out, and sites were still projecting 30 minutes. So it's a spot where if Williams gets ruled out, I do probably end up getting 2 more DeAndre Ayton, assuming that his ownership doesn't jump the way that it should if he is out. But if he's in, nothing special about the spot. Delano Banton, good point per dollar value. I think I have him projected, at least right now, as the second best point per dollar value on DraftKings. Yeah, I do. At 3K, different tier than Jalen Williams, but slightly better point per dollar than Tyus Jones, just because he's 3K flat. I'm getting to him. I'm not getting to 38% of him. This is just one of those where if all the ownership is going to go to him, I'm fine turning some of this into Chris Dunn, turning some of this into whatever other guys I was getting to, Isaiah Joe, just anybody that isn't Delano Banton. And the thing that I want to point out here is that there are minutes available for him, right? You don't have Denny Avdia. You don't have Jeremy Grant. So there are minutes available. But if Robert Williams is in, this is basically the same group of guys that we had in Portland's last game. You're just replacing Clingan with Williams. And Williams probably isn't going to play the 22 and a half minutes that Clingan played, but Ayton probably isn't going to only play 24 minutes. So you have a very similar group there. And Delano Banton played 18 and a half minutes, including a minute and a half of garbage time. He does have garbage time outs again today. He does have outs where they just run a different rotation. Like, for example, Scoot Henderson played 39 minutes. If he plays less, you could get Banton playing more. But at the same time, Anthony Simons only played 31.8 minutes. So if you were to take if Henderson only plays 34 or 35, but Simons also plays 34 or 35, you're probably still just sitting at like 18 minutes or so for Banton. Like I said, in the 18 minutes, he projects as a good play here. It's just that's a lot of ownership for somebody that projects to play 18 minutes. The risk reward just kind of pushes me towards like, okay, I'm going to have plenty of lineups that do have him. He's a good point per minute guy and all of that. But I can, mix in some other cheap guys and just hope that Delano Banton scores like 18 fantasy points in 18 minutes and ends up not being all that useful on the slate. Also, actually, I'm going to check because I am interested to see. I would expect that a high percentage of my Banton lineups are my Jalen Williams fade lineups. And yeah, so only 44% of my Banton lineups have Williams. So it looks like 15 of my lineups have Banton, don't have Williams. Only 38 lineups don't have Williams. So like roughly half of the non-Jalen Williams lineups have Delano Banton. And that's going to be for 2 reasons. One, if you're not playing Jalen Williams, you're probably trying to take the approach that I was talking about before, where you play 2 really high upside centers and you hope that you kind of can just box out the Jalen Williams teams because both of your guys outscore him by 20, 30 points. And to be able to afford those guys, obviously 3K Delano Banton becomes useful. But then the other thing is if you're taking on the 75% value in Jalen Williams, and then you also take on the 38% owned value in Banton, your teams start to look very, very similar to everybody else. And if you're doing that, that's where you're going to want to probably really be going to like your Jordan Pooles, Kyle Kuzmas, Tyrese Halliburton, Donovan Mitchell, like these really low owned guys. instead of saying like, oh, well, I'm going to play Banton, I'm going to play Cade, I'm going to play Williams, I'm going to play SGA or something like that. And then I'm going to play whatever else fits because you're going to be overlapping so much. So that's why you're probably going to see a pretty high percentage of my Banton lineups not have Williams and vice versa. Not to say that they all won't, but there's a lot of things at work there if you are going to play both of those guys in a lineup that I don't necessarily like. Anthony Simons, 6,500, really interesting tournament play because of the volatility in his minutes. He has the potential to go play 38 minutes, with no Avdia, with no Grant. Usage can go up without those guys, but we also haven't really seen it lately. He hasn't had great rotations. Like I said, he only played 32 minutes last game. He played a little bit more in that game against Miami, but that was also because he caught fire to start the third quarter. He had 17 real points in the third quarter. He just started going nuts against Miami. He played a longer stint than he had been. Still only got up to like 33 minutes in that game. Played 37 3 games ago. So if he's playing well, he can get those 38-minute games. But I didn't go quite as high on his actual projection, his minutes projection, as I've seen other places. I don't think he's just this lock to play 36 minutes like he has been, at other times in the season, just based on the rotations that he is playing. Scoot Henderson, 5,800, getting 20% ownership. I think he's fine. Again, I'm not projecting him for 39 minutes like he played last game. He was playing insanely well in that one. I think on average, you see him kind of come in around 32 minutes. If he plays well, he can get more. But that's another relatively popular spot that I am using to be different. Same goes with Sharp. Same goes with Kamara. So it is scary because, I do think Portland is, I understand why they're getting ownership. None of these plays are bad, but none of them, I've said it before, but a lot of times on slates where you have really good, really cheap value, if for me to play a lot of you at high ownership, you kind of need to be like the best point per dollar play or the highest draw projected play. And if you're not either of those things, you become a pretty strong candidate for me to find pivots off of you. And that's really the case here with Portland is, Banton's one of the best point per dollar plays, but he's behind Williams. None of these guys are up there with SGA or Cade or even, Harden, Durant, Booker as far as projection goes. So they immediately just become like, okay, I like this guy. I understand why people are playing them. But if people really want to play them, I'll let them have them, and I'll just grab a couple other guys out of the bucket that are close enough and lower owned. And that's really what's happening here with Portland, I think. Cam said, do I have a favorite small forward play? I can look. So it's kind of wonky with how it's going to get broken down here, but Lou Dort, Asar Thompson showing up at small forward. At the other forward, Jalen Williams is probably, he's a power forward only, so never mind. Yeah, small forward, I guess, looks pretty like I'm spreading things out. Lou Dort is my highest owned small forward eligible player right now at 26%. So it seems like I'm really prioritizing guys at center, point guard, power forward more so. Moving on to the last game here, Houston, the team that I really don't know what to do with, but what I can say, or what we do know is Fred VanVleet is out. Jabari Smith remains out like he has been. Tari Eason is questionable. I alluded to it before. He's been questionable for like a month. There's been reports that he's close to coming back for probably 2 or 3 weeks, and it hasn't happened. I have no idea if he's going to play. For now, I'm not projecting him to. I'm going to have plenty of exposure to this game or to these 2 late games, I think, where I can swap around as I need to. So if Tari Eason plays, I assume he's on a minutes limit. He's 5,100. He's a very good point per minute guy. I would guess he's not going to be that popular. If he plays at 5,100, if he starts, I guess he becomes interesting because that would signal that like maybe he really is going to play actual minutes. But if he's coming off the bench, I have a tough time wanting to get to him outside of like if I'm swapping some lineups that something went wrong and I just need like a really low owned guy with I guess a high ceiling. But it's more so if he plays, I think he kind of impacts minutes for other guys. But even that doesn't necessarily matter too much because with VanVleet and Smith out, you just have minutes available for enough other guys. Like I projected minutes, a handful of minutes for Shepherd. My guess on the starting lineup was Jeff Green. It could be Aaron Holiday. It could be Shepherd. It could be kind of anybody. It could be Whitmore. My guess with Green is just because they went to him last time that I think it was Thompson was out, and Smith was out. It was the game that Amen Thompson was suspended. So obviously not the same player, but like you can have Amen Thompson with Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jeff Green, and then Şengün, and then you have Aaron Holiday still as your backup guard off the bench. So that was my guess. If Aaron Holiday starts, he'll project similarly to Jeff Green. I have like a 17-point projection. At no ownership, I got to like 8%, which tells you that it's not a great play because with any ownership, he just becomes kind of worthless. But at 3K flat, I'll roll the dice on a little bit of him or a little bit of Aaron Holiday, whoever's starting, if it's one of those guys. Amen Thompson should play a lot. Production should go up at least somewhat here with no Van Vliet. Should have the ball in his hands a bit more, both him and Jalen Green. Jalen Green, I assume his ownership comes up a little bit now with Van Vliet out. He should have the ball in his hands more too. I'm pulling up their rates now with Van Vliet off the floor. So far this season with no Van Vliet, 438 minutes played for Amen Thompson, 1.06 DraftKings points per minute, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute for Jalen Green. If you compare those to Van Vliet being on the floor, Jalen Green is at 1 fantasy point per minute with Van Vliet on the floor. Thompson is at 1 fantasy point per minute. So small, slight upgrades for these guys. Nothing crazy. You're not getting like a Cade Cunningham effect or anything like that, but they do look a little bit better. Plus, it does also increase their playing time projection. Not that they really needed it, but it's more likely that you get that 36, 37-minute game from Green. It's more likely you get that 40-minute game from Thompson. I have them at 38 and 36 right now. Might go a little bit higher. I generally don't go too much higher than that just because things happen, but they both do look better than they would have with Van Vliet in. Şengün looks better. Keep in mind, even though they play different positions, that Şengün is somebody that can works as a playmaker, works as a facilitator. He's at 1.38 DraftKings points per minute with Van Vliet on the floor so far this season. If you take Van Vliet off the floor, he's at 1.41 DraftKings points per minute. So you haven't seen a big uptick as far as median goes, just like what you haven't with the other guys. But the ceiling does become at least a little bit higher for Şengün. Only 8% ownership. This is another center where I do like him as a pivot to both, higher owned centers and to these guys in the like 7 to 8K range that are a little bit less expensive, but a lot more popular. Cam Whitmore, if Easton is out, I think becomes another guy at 3,700 that you just can throw into some lineups because, he's not named Delano Banton, basically, and just hope for the best. I expect that playing time will be pretty volatile outside of Thompson, Şengün, Green, and Brooks. Whoever's playing well probably gets more minutes because this is a team that has a lot of versatility. They have guys that can defend multiple positions. They have guys that can handle the ball. You have a center in Şengün that can facilitate. So they're not like pigeonholed into Fred VanVleet's out. We need a guard to replace his minutes. They can kind of do whatever they want. And so somebody like Cam Whitmore, if he's playing well, can just slide into more minutes. Jeff Green, Aaron Holiday can just slide into more minutes if they're playing well. So I do like trying to take advantage of that. So I do think there's a chance I get a little bit more Houston once I rerun everything with everything fully updated for VanVleet out. But they do look like a secondary team still, just because you're not getting huge bumps for anybody. You're just getting these slight bumps. On the Sacramento side, Marquee Sports said Jarris Walker or Banton. I mean, Banton projects better. I also have more of him, but Walker's not getting any ownership. So, I mean, like the answer, kind of no matter how you look at it, is Banton, I think. He projects better. I'm getting to more of him, but Walker is fine in like a lineup here or there as a guy that just won't have any ownership, I don't think. On the Sacramento side, I'm not getting to too much here either. Brutal spot against Houston. Relatively high total for Sacramento at 115, but Houston is a top 5 defensive team this year. They rank 3rd in adjusted defensive rating, or 4th. I guess this must have just updated today. They were 3rd or yesterday. So they rank 4th in defensive rating. They rank 19th in pace. Just a pretty tough spot for Sacramento. Working in Sacramento's favor is that this is another team that just plays really big minutes. So, both sides of this game, you can pretty comfortably project 35 plus minutes to the starters. I have 35 plus to all of Fox, Sabonis, Murray, DeRozan. Malik Monk is listed as probable. He missed the last game. I did project him in. I was just double checking that, but not getting to him, but I am getting to some of these other guys. No real ownership coming in. I'm pretty close to the field on all of them, but high upside guys that you can use to differentiate, especially Fox and Sabonis. Obviously, just becomes difficult to get Sabonis because he is center only on DraftKings. I think he has power forward eligibility on FanDuel, so he should get some more ownership be a little bit easier to get to there, but pretty tough on DraftKings. So that's how things are looking for me right now. I think it looks like a pretty fun, interesting slate. Looking forward to playing it. Thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget, you can get access to my NBA projections for DraftKings and FanDuel using that Dub Club link in the description below. Also, if you want access to the videos, strategy videos that we have up at Endgame Syndicate, that link is there as well. If you join Endgame Syndicate, send me a message in that Discord if you also want the projections, and I will just give those to you. So yeah, those are included if you sign up for Endgame. Check out those links. Thanks again for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all of that stuff, and good luck on your lineups tonight.